All right, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks for those that joined. Today's presentation we're going to go over is hopefully it won't be a entirely too dry, monotonous, boring webinar for you. We're going to have a little bit of a fun story of back in 2016 when Uber first launched Marketo and kind of what that looked like in the early days. So we're going to focus today on the team, the org structure, and what it looked like for the first 3 months, and get into some specific details for you here. Quick background on today's presentation. So if you're unfamiliar with Blueprint, we're an Adobe partner that does a lot of the Marketo implementation. Myself, I personally was at Uber for a little over 3 years and helped set up the Marketo implementation. Now we do a lot of consulting on the Blueprint side. So we wanted to do a joint presentation with our partners at Adobe as kind of a fun story about if you're evaluating Marketo or if you already have Marketo, hopefully there's some tips and tricks for you to take away. So what we're going to focus on today is the platform decision that Uber made. So there are multiple other tools that were in at Uber for marketing automation, and we're going to go through the logic that the team made and how we decided to ultimately go with Marketo. We still use multiple other platforms. It's not just exclusively a Marketo shop, and I'll walk through how and when we use the different tools. We're also going to go through org structure. I think a lot of people sometimes are curious about where does the team sit? Should I have everything be done centrally? Should it be done decentralized and within the region? I'll walk through Uber structure there. And then we'll go through the first 90 days of what campaigns we chose, what mistakes we made, and what the day-to-day looked like in terms of a staffing standpoint. And I'll try to make it as fun as possible, but these pictures on the right here were some of the early days that I was at Uber. It wasn't anything crazy special where we had just some it's kind of a janky stand-up desk with laptops, and you got Marketo pulled up there. I think that was the first week back in 2016 when we just purchased Marketo. We were just starting to stand up some basic automations, and there was only one person on the team. So I'll walk through what that looked like. All right, so let's start with what the tech stack looked like at Uber back in 2016. So I know a lot of times customers are always curious about what tools are used. Pretty traditional from a digital marketing side of the house. The content management system they built, or we built as an entirely homegrown solution, which again, I know that Uber is a quite large company, but even some of the smaller companies we see are trying to decide, are we going to go with a Drupal? Do we purchase one of Adobe's products, or do we just leverage our own homegrown solution? Uber has used their own homegrown solution for quite some time. The focus for today's presentation is market automation, something that I haven't seen too often, but is completely prolific at Uber was yet another mail merge. And if you're unfamiliar with that, it is simply just taking kind of like a Google Sheet or an Excel and then throwing it into your Gmail and sending it from there. You would be blown away what percentage of Uber's business was tied together with duct tape and yet another mail merge. So back in 2016, there was Marketo, there was Pardot, there was Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and there was yet another mail merge because every region was kind of its own fragmented silo. And so one of the first responsibilities that we had was, okay, let's evaluate these platforms. Should we decide to move forward with one or deprecate the other? And because the team was only one person, that was myself, what we needed to do was to decide on which platform is going to be the most flexible, integrated with Salesforce. And it was also the one that I was familiar with the most. And so we went with Marketo as that. And we deprecated everything else from a B2B standpoint. So there's no longer any using Pardot. Marketing Cloud is still used to a degree, but much more on the consumer, large commercial enterprise side. For all the B2B top of funnel acquisition, still to this day, we have 3 instances of Marketo used at Uber. Salesforce is a CRM. And then if you're unfamiliar with Groove, as you can imagine, there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of salespeople at Uber, and we were unable to support every single one individually through Marketo. So what we did was we leveraged a tool called Groove, but still we were able to build the templates in Marketo. It's not direct competitor to Sales Insight that Marketo makes. It has much more kind of like mini flow workflow logic, which in my opinion is very valuable and still gives sales the flexibility to do their own kind of small campaigns when marketing may not have bandwidth to do every single flow. And just as a reminder for those other folks that have joined, if you do have a question or anything, feel free to throw it in the Q&A, and I have it pulled up, and I'm happy to address this as things go along. So that's a tech stack. Keep in mind for today's presentation, we're talking about Uber Freight, Uber for Business, and Uber Eats. Those are the B2B divisions. So an Uber Freight would be, for example, a large shipper such as a Nestle or a Heineken or a Procter & Gamble. Uber for Business could be, let's say, a large consulting firm such as an Accenture or Boston Consulting Group that has many people traveling. And then Uber Eats would be the restaurants such as McDonald's or Subway or even small pizzerias on the corner. So keep that in mind as we continue throughout today. All right, team structure. Surprisingly, get this question asked more than technology. This was the team structure for Uber back starting in 2015 and 2016. The marketing team across all divisions, meaning consumer and enterprise, which we call B2B, was about 65 people. The digital marketing team was by far the largest, and that was because they had a billion with a B budget a year just to completely blow on Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And again, I understand that Uber is a very unique example on that. But what kind of the reason why I emphasize that is that there wasn't very strong attribution. There was purely just a kind of a shotgun approach, spray and pray on digital for just a hope of digital impressions, and there was no tracking really from a conversion standpoint all the way through the funnel. And I'll touch on that more of that later about how we rolled these things out. Where we'll be focusing today, even though it's confusing, a lot of Silicon Valley companies now start calling the market operations function CRM for customer relationship marketing, not to be confused with like Salesforce or Dynamics CRM. Within the CRM team, we had five, and the enterprise, which is the B2B function of those brands that I mentioned, was one person at the time. So the consumer side of it, that would be like Eater, Courier, Writer, those people that were doing those automations was four. Which, if you think about it, it still is pretty amazing that 5 years ago there was only four people running automations for all consumer communications out of HQ, and this was the consumer function was for U.S. Canada. The enterprise function was global, meaning that there was only one individual that was responsible for all marketing, Marketo, CRM functionality globally for that. And I'll talk about how we kind of decided to scale that up. We had 6 program managers and 11 brand folks that kind of drove a lot of the copy, the creative, and downstream enterprise would be able to benefit from that. So if you're looking for a marketing manager as we scaled the team, obviously with one person, that was back in 2016. This enterprise team now is about 6 people globally, which still is relatively small for if you think about the size of Uber. With those people, now that it's 6, we look for 3 to 5 years of using any platform. It doesn't have to be Marketo. It could be an Eloqua, it could be a marketing cloud, it could be a Pardot or a HubSpot. This is ultimately who we're hiring for that role. Same with the CRM, a Salesforce background. It's We hired a lot of people with a sales role, which an SDR, inside sales, just because we really wanted to have them know the sales language, and we didn't want this divide between marketing and sales, which we commonly see. And then the last one, which again I know maybe doesn't apply to a lot of people, but I cannot emphasize enough how incredibly helpful it is if you know SQL or familiar with databases. So back in this time frame, well over half the people at Uber could write queries directly in the database and pull their cohorts because it was growing so quickly. We didn't have a lot of these tools that were just plug and play and connected with all the systems yet, because we'd launch a new market, it could be every week. And so it was just so incredibly quick for us to scale. And the only thing that was scaling that quickly was the tables, the underlying data. So all of our team could write basic queries, and we needed that to be able to figure out how to pipeline data into Salesforce, or if we wanted to query a cohort directly. And a lot of times we were doing custom integrations with Marketo, and the SQL skills came in really handy. I know that doesn't apply to a lot of customers, but I can say that from a database familiarity, it's very valuable. Can you tell the difference between a transactional table and an account table and a contact table, and how you need to relate all those three objects? Comes very in handy when we're trying to scale quite quickly. So Salesforce was owned centrally. I'll kind of show you here from a geography standpoint. Salesforce was owned out of HQ. Marketo was also owned out of HQ. And the platform admins kind of had sole responsibility, and it kind of knocked out everything in San Francisco. However, as things started to scale, we headed an enterprise lead in each of the regions: LATAM, EMEA, APAC, and ANZ. So what we did is we made the platform decisions out of headquarters, but ultimately the campaign executions were at a regional level. The only time the HQ CRM admin would be involved is if there's a global automation. So let me emphasize that. Global automations came out of headquarters. Regional automations were ultimately responsible for the regional lead. So that gives you that balance of centralized versus decentralized, which I know that a lot of customers are kind of curious on all of that. So each region was responsible for their own resources, their own copy, their own creative. I mean, a lot of them had to get scrappiness on that because, some markets didn't have a designer, they didn't have a copywriter, so they would just clone or come to HQ, and we kind of have to, rob from Peter to pay Paul on trying to figure all that out. And that was the growing phase, which now we've centralized a lot of things, but I'll let you know that things have slowed down dramatically from the days back then. And so I'm a big advocate of platform done centrally, process and campaigns loan regionally. And that really helps you keep that nimble nature and still being able to acclimate for languages and translations and everything else. All right. So what were the first priorities that we tackled the moment we turned Marketo on? And this can apply to any marketing automation platform, I think. The first one is that we only synced over the necessary fields. I know this may be a no-brainer, but if you by default just flip the switch, there's probably about 180 to 200 fields that you, if you're not careful, will sync over. Even at Uber, we only started syncing about 60 to 70 fields at the very beginning. And the reason why is that I knew down the line that there was going to be some huge sync issues if we weren't careful because of the volume. I mean, you're talking tens of millions of records through a sync, a normal sync that you'd have to take a lot of different advancements and optimizing and making sure that you iterate on it quite a bit. So we made sure that we went through an exercise and I only had the stakeholders check the boxes on which fields they knew were critical, and we only synced those. That really helped us make sure we keep things clean. The second one was a lifecycle model. Now, a lot of people may talk about lead scoring or lead stores. The lifecycle model, which is the revenue model in Marketo, they refer to it as. The reason why this is so important is that if you ever think about talking with sales and marketing, they say, well, is it MQL, is it SAL, is it top of funnel, is it bottom of funnel? You can kind of see a little screenshot here. The revenue monitor was always on every single whiteboard. It was printed. It was on people's desks. We'd always a screen share. And it was the fundamental benchmark of us always coming back. It's like, okay, well, what stage of the funnel? Should it be a lead scoring and converting at this stage? Is this the value that you want? Do you see that if it's a click and a filled out form and attends an event that goes straight to this fast track stage? And we always refer back to the model. That way you didn't have this ambiguous nature of sales not understanding what stage or what model or what the revenue funnel was looking like. So that really was able to have us build that. And then we plugged into the pieces inside of that model that you need, such as lead scoring. We kept a very simple lead scoring model across all brands. We didn't do a lead rating. We didn't do a lead scoring model for each division. We didn't do, I think, more than probably 15 different values. Very simple. And then we just iterated every month. We'd have a review of MQL quality with the team, and we would change it. Even to this day, I think there's only been maybe 2 or 3 iterations on the lead scoring model for 5 years at Uber. So keep the fundamentals. The fourth thing we did was lead source attribution. I agreed with the Salesforce team, the sales team, and the marketing team. Okay, you want lead source, you want lead source detail, and last came attribution, campaign attribution. Those 3 fields we would stamp on every single record. And we had agreed on pick list values for those fields to keep things nice and clean. You couldn't overwrite certain fields. So we went that exercise. That was the fourth thing that we did. And that was painful because sales says, no, I think it should be contact us versus marketing saying, no, I think it should be web form. And you have one step lower, which would be contact us. If you'd like to learn more about, documentation and best practices on that, feel free to reach out because I think that's not necessarily an exact science, but we do have a lot of recommendations on some really cool designs on taking last touch attribution by stage. So imagine if you have sales accepted stage here, you can take the last campaign that it engaged with as it goes through that stage. And at Uber, we could pull a report every single month that says, give me the best performing campaign by stage of the funnel. And it was a very simple report that we pulled, and that was because we had the lead source attribution set up. The last one was asset templates. This would be the emails, the forms, the landing pages. We needed designer resources for this. We needed a creative developer. And that took quite a bit because it was just a hyper growth company, and B2B was a much smaller division than the rest of the other division. But luckily, we were able to get a really flexible guided templates in, and we used those for quite some time. And we could still have our designers go in and update and tweak quite a bit, which is quite helpful. All right, so all those things that happened, what was the timeline? Again, so we had one Salesforce CRM that we had, a few hours a week, and we had one Marketo or one campaign resource that was doing all of this. So the necessary field sync and the lifecycle model we had set up in 3 weeks, and these were the resources that we had required. Lifecycle model by far, and these can be run in parallel. The life cycle by model by far was the one that takes the most resources because it takes senior leadership involved in that as well. We then moved over to lead scoring and lead source attribution. That took 6 weeks. Lead source attribution, the main reason why it took much longer than the others is because you have to enforce the pick list values. You have to clean up the lead source. You have to make sure that you have lead source and contact source. Okay, does that stay with you as you convert through all the way up, which is a big gap that a lot of customers face is how do we make sure we have that? So that was another thing that we did in 6 weeks. And then the last thing that we did was the asset templates, as I mentioned, and that was 4 weeks. That was for our designers to take the Figma files to build that inside of um, build those the creative files, and then we uploaded those into Marketo. So that's a timeline and execution that we did there. Biggest mistakes made. I try to make these unique. I don't want it to be about, we designed something a certain way, but I would say at the very beginning, we built everything that anybody ever asked us to do. And that was a big mistake. What we did was we always tried to just make the stakeholders happy by getting buy-in and building whatever they needed, when in reality, we should have asked them, are you A/B testing this? Can you tell us emphatically that this is going to perform? And if they couldn't answer that, then we said, then how do we know that we're launching this campaign correctly? And it was a mindset change. So control and treatment, we educated all of our stakeholders on, we need to do a control, we need to do a treatment to do this experiment to tell us if it's going to improve and change any behavior. Another thing that we made a biggest mistake on is that the campaigns became complicated quite quickly where we needed custom development a little bit. And it would have been much better if we had an API developer or somebody with a little bit of that background. In my opinion, it's always better to hire somebody that's a little bit more technical than somebody that's a little bit more strategic. It's just my preference there. I'm always happy to train a technical person a little bit more on the strategic side of things, versus it's much harder to train a strategic person to write, let's say, API integration or write queries to hit the tables there. The other thing that we did is that because we were scaling globally with only one of us, one resource, every single campaign that we set up live, we set up automated reporting to that stakeholder. We pasted the Google link to the Jira or the request ticket inside the program campaign and in the report that we sent to them every week. If they ever asked us to change a campaign, or they ever asked us about how the campaign's performing, we immediately kind of push them a little bit saying, hey, you have the report. You should be telling us. And then we would schedule follow-ups to make sure that they're reading the report. So we would send stakeholders, hey, can you tell us how many MQLs these campaigns are performing? And if they couldn't answer it, then we quickly escalate that to their management saying, listen, they're asking us to build these campaigns. They don't even know the number of qualified leads that are coming through. They really need to reevaluate their priorities on what the requests that are coming through with us. So we did on a monthly basis with the regional management a campaign walkthrough, the number of MQLs, the number of conversions, the lead source, the channel spend, and the majority of the time they could never answer the questions on like the number of MQLs. It's like, well, we sent you reporting, and yet you still don't know how it's performing. So why should we continue to build report campaigns for you if you just have this gut feeling that these campaigns should work? And we really were able to change that behavior because we were a little bit difficult on that. So here's an example of what we did for early campaign priority. This was an Uber Eats restaurant campaign that we launched through Marketo. You can kind of see that it's like a subway stop where kind of you see the checks and it tells you where to pick off. The reason why we chose this as our earliest priority was it wasn't because we could prove the ROI. We actually weren't able to prove ROI on almost all of our campaigns to a degree. But what we did know is that sales, account managers, and ops globally spent thousands and thousands of hours booking photographers, manually uploading their menus, calling on restaurants, resetting passwords. We decided to take all of that, group it up, and throw it into one campaign. So you can kind of read the copy here where it says, hey, let's upload your menu, book a photographer, order your tablet. We even integrated with DHL and shipping platforms to give them confirmation in their emails in Marketo when we did that. So we wrapped all that into one. And it's not super proud of it, but we had entire COE teams of like 20 or 25 onboarders that collapsed because we were able to automate everything that they were doing manually, or they could be migrated on other functions. So to me, this was a massive help on that. It reduced churn by fourfold because restaurants didn't get frustrated with not being able to log in because we sent them their details. We're also able to help how they're online. We're able to book the number of first trips, which is what they would call them booking their orders. And then overall as a cost per channel, here's some numbers for you on like, we would spend about 130 euros per restaurant sometimes on Facebook. It was a very expensive channel, but we ended up deprecating because we were finding other channels that were less expensive and can convert quicker. So these are some of the spends that we had per channel for this campaign that we went through. So this was a big lift that we had, but it's still running today, and it's definitely one of the big prides that we have there. So as I said, I just wanted to do, quick 15, 20 minutes to walk you guys through all that. I hope that there was some of that I was able to take away from and take some keen insights. If you have any Q&As, you're welcome to drop it in right now. But otherwise, we're happy to package up this deck for you guys, and you can reach out to us directly if you have any questions. But I'll just give it 30 seconds to see if anybody else has some additional questions, and then we'll kind of close it after that. So we just had one question come in about what were all the required resources on building this campaign here. I think the one campaign that we would say here is we had a designer, a copywriter, a Marketo resource, and then we would have a Salesforce resource. So this was the four resources that we used to build this campaign. And this was by far one of the most complex campaigns that we had. So I would say that's one of the biggest one. We had another question come in. What was your biggest challenge or blocker? I would say the ability to push very complex data easily into Marketo that doesn't already exist in Salesforce was our biggest challenge or blocker. So let's say, for example, a lot of our customers have the same thing. It's like, hey, I want to push transaction data into Marketo and do dynamic campaigns. That's what this does right here. Let's call the shipping provider DHL, or let's see if they've logged in the past week or so. That's very valuable data, but you don't need to have that in Salesforce. If you have an API developer, it's very easy to push that into Marketo, but we didn't have access to developer. So one of the coolest campaigns that I now do with customers is how to push transactional or really rich data from back office or custom data sources into Marketo. And we do amazing campaigns based upon that. But to answer your question, Nicholas, in terms of what was our biggest blocker, it was back office data and pushing that in. Another question we have is, do you use a center of excellence for passing campaigns to other workspaces, and how do you measure them? The answer is yes. Every single user, we locked down their role so they could only clone from center of excellence. And we made sure that every single smart campaign had probably about 12 different flow steps of changing different data values because we really wanted to hard code and lock that in. The way that we measured them is we had a report sent to every single user, and whenever you build a program, there's a tag with the username. And whenever a user didn't fill out something such as lead source, period cost, or naming convention incorrect, we had automated reports that went to them and CC'd the manager. And it would say something like, hey, Nicholas, we noticed that you missed period cost and lead source on these 15 programs. Please go back in and update that. So it was a little bit intense, but it was a great accountability mechanism that we put in place. And those reports are still today to keep enforcing behavior on that, because otherwise we noticed that people would get quite sloppy on that. So thanks for those questions. Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for showing up. I hope you're able to get something of it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or the Adobe team. And if you'd like to learn more about Uber, I'm happy to introduce you to folks at Uber if you'd like to talk with them as well. So they're always happy to share their learning. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your day.